I actually started my work when I was 18 years old, and I had a little bit of an unconventional start. I dropped out of university. I was at Tufts University in the US, and I walked into a community. And the first girl I ever met was the girl you see on the slide. Her name is Pinky. And she changed my life, even though she doesn't know that she did, because of her eyes. I looked at her eyes and I saw in her eyes such limitless potential. And I really thought to myself, oh my gosh, how incredible this child can be. She has so much potential. And yet, at the same time, I had another very contradictory thought. And I said, what if she doesn't get the opportunities to unleash that potential? And so, really, if I were to tell you in one line what my 30-year journey has been, I'm getting old now and I've been doing this for a long time. My 30-year journey has just been around trying to unleash the potential of people. And I think it's very similar to what Talerang and Shweta and all the folks with you is trying to do with all of you over these few days. Like, how do we really all unleash our greatest potential? And so I really did two big things in my life. One was at 18, I started a college at the time, little college project. We were all volunteers, but we believed that we had a lot to give. And we believed that there were a lot of kids that wanted to learn. And so we just started teaching. And that organization grew into an organization called Akanksha, which today runs schools across Mumbai and Pune and is really putting children on a fundamentally different life path. I spent 17 years at Akanksha, and more than anything else, I learned some of the most valuable lessons of leadership from my children. They taught me how to be brave and resilient and how to have love in my heart and how to never give up, even if everything felt wrong. And so I'll always have like immense gratitude for the children of Akanksha. And the second thing I did was I started an organization called Teach for India. And I will shamelessly say that my big dream from this conversation is that one day you find yourselves in the Teach for India fellowship. But really, Teach for India came from a belief that teaching had changed my life and helped me grow in ways that I don't think anything else would have helped me grow in. And I wanted to give that chance to other people. So Teach for India attracts like some of the best and brightest young people from across the country, puts them in some of the most difficult classrooms for 2 years and really develops them into lifelong leaders for education. So that's a little bit about the two things that I've done in my life. But that's not really what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to talk a little bit today about the power of this moment that we are in right now. And I don't know how all of you have felt through this last very difficult year of the pandemic, but one of my dear friends showed me this image somewhere in the middle of the pandemic, and he said, doesn't it feel like you've been just in a really dark tunnel? And you know that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but it's really hard to see that light at the end of the tunnel. And that really resonated with me. And so I wanted to start by asking you all to go over to the chat box and top of mind, don't spend any time thinking, but what are the 3 words that most describe your last 1 year? Hectic, yeah. Inspiring, hard, different, yeah. The world has changed and so has our world. Difficult, eye-opening, surreal, creative, lazy, new. One of them came directly to me, so I'm reading it out. Beautiful, very different words coming up. Chaotic, inspiring, jarring, blurry, unstable, chaotic, pivotal, beautiful word. Chaos, quiet, love, reflective, plethora of time. I guess this is my next look at this slide and community. lives with about 6 to 8 members of a home in a 10-foot by 10-foot home. And then on the right side, you see a high income student who goes to one of the country's IB schools. That the pandemic has impacted all of us. And in some ways, it has been an equalizer. But how do you think it's impacted us differently? Like, what's the difference in your mind between what the girl on the left and what the girl on the right have experienced over this year? You can again come back to the chat box. Request you to put your chat on everyone so everybody can see your thoughts. And just answer this question. Did the pandemic impact us equally? And if your answer is yes, then why? And if your answer is no, then why? It impacted all of us, but some more than others. Yeah, Shreya, it would be great if you could try to articulate why is that? Why is that?
Stay home for a long time, but some people already had like previous setbacks. Like we all had our own rooms, but other people, some didn't have that privilege. So it's impacted all of us, but for some other people, it's been harsher.
Great, thank you. Yeah. And then Kahini is saying no, because everyone dealt with the changes differently. Very beautiful perspective, right? It doesn't matter what our problems are, but it's the way we deal with them. Yes, it did. As on the one hand of the spectrum, people were facing boredom. On the other side, facing lack of food, shelter, and income. Yeah, thank you for that. So I'm going to share a little bit of our experience at TFI. And my answer to the question is that the pandemic really did impact us very, very differently. On the left, you'll see images. So TFI is an educational organization, but we had to pivot almost overnight to just feed our children because their families were slipping rapidly back into poverty, and we had to arrange rations for them. On the right, you'll see that one of our biggest issues, and again, where kids are not equal, sadly, in the world, is in access to online education. So while high-income kids were able to pivot to online education right away, our kids didn't have smartphones, they didn't have devices, they didn't have internet recharge. Their learning just stopped. And so in a city like the city where I live in, Mumbai, schools were open for less than 20 days the entire year, and many children have just had no access to learning. So lots and lots of issues in education, but this year, even more issues. And yet, what do? Do you stay in the tunnel or do you look for the light? And I wanted to share one of my favorite quotes with you from Bruce Lee, who says, "To hell with circumstances, I create opportunities." So how do we create an opportunity out of like the mess that children have gone through over this past year? And I called this presentation What If, and I want to give credit to my two dear friends who run an organization in Bangalore. You may have heard of it, called Dream a Dream. And they said, you know what? Instead of stopping and feeling sorry for ourselves, let's do this. Let's pause. Let's ask ourselves, what if? And this is the illustration that Sucheta, the founder of Dream a Dream, made. She said, on the left was the pre-pandemic world, on the right is the possibility of the post-pandemic world. And so actually where you are in this moment, thinking about what you want to do with your lives, could not be a better and more opportune time to be asking that. And so let's dream a little bit of what if. If we could ask ourselves, and I will ask you in a few minutes, what is your what if for education? And why education? Because I see education as the single biggest tool to unleash potential, whatever that education needs to be and needs to look like. So let's look at some Teach for India children. When we asked them, what is your dream for education? What is your what if? Here is what they said. answer this question, like as you read those dreams of children who live in disadvantaged communities, don't have the same access to resources that most of us have, what is your what if for education? Like if you were in control of reimagining learning for the country so that India could unleash her greatest potential, what would your what if be? And really think about like what's one thing about school and learning that you just didn't like, that stopped you? What was one thing maybe that resonated with something that you read just now or something else? So let's all go over the chat window again. I'm just going to give you 30 seconds to do this. What is your what if for education? What if students were grouped not based on age or skill, but on passion? Love it. What if there were more teacher education programs to make them more engaging? Yep. I think someone mentioned boredom earlier as well. What if students were not judged by their backgrounds? And what if there was no connotation of the teacher's point and most hated child by the teacher? Yeah, it's a beautiful point. What if we were not defined by our marks, but more on our desire for impact in the world? How incredible would that be? And you know, the crazy thing I find about the education sector is it is students like you that have these answers, right? Like, you know what education should be. And yet, like, we don't ask you. We don't ask you. And so it's so powerful to hear what you would want to change. What if we change the purpose of education? And I think, Mehak, this is very close to what you said in the chat box right now. But what if education was, of course, about self? Because ultimately, I need to be prepared for the job of my choice and the life of my choice. And that really, really matters. But what if education also was about unleashing the other's potential? What if education was also about making the world better, making the country better, right? The whole purpose of education would shift. What if all teachers look at the child before the student? What a beautiful, powerful thought. Second thing, what if we learned what really mattered? And I don't know how many of you in school found yourself asking yourself, like, but why? Why am I being asked to learn this? Like, is it really going to matter? And we think a lot about like what you really need to learn and what you'll actually learn through a program like what you're going through. You learn to be courageous, right? The world needs you to be courageous. The world needs you to be kind. The world needs you to be a problem solver using critical thinking. The world needs you to be obsessively curious and ask why. The world needs you to raise your voice and be empowered to be who you really are. What if school taught these things? Wouldn't that be like completely different? And Talia has written something very similar. What if marks and exam results were not the focal point of achievement and human character? Love that. And then my big question, what if all kids, every single child in our country, and I want you to imagine walking out on the street like you could pre-lockdown times, and seeing children living on the street, living in small communities. What if every one of those children as well attained an excellent education? What would happen to our country if our country's fullest potential was unleashed? So I'm going to give you an example. I want you to meet Rehan and Basit, who were 10 years old when I first met them 2 years ago. And this, sadly, is the community where they live. It is in Ahmedabad, and it is a community that is not served by the Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation. No one comes to clean the garbage, one checks on the water. And you have to go through and pass 8 mountains, and I'm not exaggerating, mountains of garbage to come to Rehan and Basit's home. But look at what happened when I met Rehan and Basit. They started telling me about the work that they do. So when they were 10 years old, and I'll put all the pictures up so that you can see them. When they were 10 years old, they started their own NGO called Pencil Bricks. And they started by saying, we can't live in filth like this. We need to get the garbage collected. And so they scaled to the top of one of these mountains of garbage, collected samples, sent them to the media, sent them to the government, and lobbied with the government to start coming and clearing the area. Then they realized that there were a lot of kids in their community who just were not in school at all. So they started 20 learning centers in their community. And guess what? Every learning center, the teacher in the learning center is a 10 to 12-year-old child. They started working with women. They set up plant nurseries in the community, and they are 12 years old today. Look at the power of what they have learned and how they have grown as leaders. And I want to show you a little WhatsApp message that I got from Rehan this year. When the pandemic hit, they also started collecting and giving out rations. And look at the last thing he writes, which I thought was so powerful. I felt so happy. Watch us shine, maybe small, but here us grow. We are seeds, we won't be shy. This line means to you, we are the ones we are waiting for. We are the ones we are waiting for. So go back to the chat box one last time. And what does that mean to you? We are the ones we are waiting for. If we want a change to happen, we have to make it happen. We can't wait for other people to do it. Yeah, so beautiful and so true. Step up and take the action ourselves. Everyone's waiting for someone else to step up. Kahini's writing, beautiful, and do something. But the change needs to start with ourselves. So I worked with a student called Latif, and we used to have musicals at Akanksha, and he was sort of the star of one of the musicals, and I was very close to him. And then Latif got very ill very suddenly, and he passed away. Literally overnight, of a respiratory infection that could quite easily have been prevented if he had better health care. And the next day I was talking to his grandfather. He lived with his grandfather, and his grandfather had saved up 14,000 rupees over many months. And when he knew that Latif was sick, he gave Latif the 14,000 rupees. And he said, Latif, you're very, very sick. Take this money and go to a private hospital. Don't go to a government hospital. But Latif, because he didn't want his grandfather, who was old and arthritic, to go back to work, he, without telling anyone, hid that 14,000 rupees back in the house, went out, went into a government hospital, and died 12 hours later. And like, I will never know. You never know what would have happened if he'd gone to a different hospital. Perhaps would not have survived. But what I do know is that that day, you know, for many years I had thought, I'm a person who gives. I'm like in this business of giving, right? Like, this is what I do. This is my job. But I realized from that 20-year-old kid that I had no clue of our human capacity to be able to give, that Latif had put like his own life at stake for someone that he loved. And that is our capacity to give. We had a child just a few years ago who was playing on a terrace and got electrocuted. And within hours, he had to have one of his arms amputated. And I was called and I said, I'm coming to the hospital. And this was 3 days after he got his arm amputated. I was very, very scared. What do you tell a 12-year-old child who's just lost his arm? And when I got there, his name is Ramesh, and he was smiling, sitting up in bed, his arm bandaged, and he had a game next to him. So I said, why don't we play the game? And quite stupidly, I said, look, Ramesh, I'll also put one hand behind my back, and I'll play with one hand, and you play with your one hand. And Ramesh looked at me with such a kind smile, and he said, why, Didi? He said, you have two hands. Why do you want to play with one hand? Play with two hands, Didi. It's okay. The kind of acceptance and courage that I have learned from children living in poverty, I think is just something completely incredible. I know I came into this work thinking I'm going to be giving a lot, and maybe that's how you all are thinking also, like, in what way can I really contribute to the world? But I think my single biggest lesson through all these years is I've got back so much more. I've learned so much more. It's been such a small thing that I've been able to give in comparison to what I've gotten back. I think children are children, and all children are conscious of what they don't have. It's a little bit of human nature, right? We always believe that somebody has a little bit more, somebody is a little bit luckier, somebody is a little bit smarter, and our children are no different. I do think what is different about the kind of education that they've got is they've learned to practice gratitude. And what I've learned about the practice of gratitude is it changes everything in your life, because it's not that there won't be people, there will always be people who are smarter than me and prettier than me and all of that. But when you're focusing on the things that you have and not the things that you don't have, the whole way you see the world shifts. And I've realized it's a practice. It's like how we train our mind to learn math and language and science. If we train our brain to see what we have and to hold on to it and make it even bigger in our minds than it really is, our lives really become better.
Throughout this whole journey, did you ever have this feeling of doubt or like the sense that it might not work? And what challenges did you face, and what kept you going to actually like make this successful?
Yeah, such a beautiful question. You know, the doubt's there all the time. All the time. Like I tell people that there's so many moments when I just feel, how can I do this job? It's so much harder and more complex than my skills and my ability. And so doubt is always there, and the challenges are constant, right? Like the challenges are just never ending. I think a big shift for me, Mehak, was just learning slowly to see the challenges differently. And just to say that, like, you know, the thing with challenges is you solve one and another five come your way. And as you get older, life doesn't get easier, it gets tougher and you have more challenges. But if you can just stop feeling bad about the challenges you have and questioning, like, but why? And moving away from the, like, poor me, this is the challenge I'm going through, to really saying, my gosh, this is like the biggest opportunity I have to evolve and to grow my leadership, and to be a little bit better and to be a little bit stronger and to be a little bit kinder. If you start seeing challenges in that way, I think for me, that was life changing. It's not that I'm always able to do it at all. I still have a lot of doubt and I still get very daunted by challenge. Try to see them as opportunities to become a little bit more the person who I want to be.
That was really nice. Thank you.